All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. Martyn, how was your weekend, and did you get to watch some of the action?
Not bad. We had a very busy day on Sunday in the office, Jake, because of course there were what seemed like hundreds of Challenge Cup games to, file reports on and get published in League Express. But fortunately, we managed to do it. And one of my colleagues had been quite unwell actually in the week leading up to Sunday, and I was a bit fearful that he might not be able to turn in. But fortunately, all the staff were on board, and we managed to get the paper out. And if you want to know anything about the second round of the Challenge Cup, then this week's League Express is the place to find it.
Absolutely.
Every match report is in there.
So how many reporters did you have out in the field? Because there was heaps of games.
20-odd, I think, altogether. Yeah, loads of them.
Wow.
And it was great that we managed to, file copy on it, get a reporter to file copy on every game, and marvellous. So, and it was quite an eventful weekend, really, at the end of the day, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, mate, because we had heaps of pre-season matches
we did pre-season games as well, so, we were really busy.
Absolutely, mate. But I guess, how about let's start with some of the pre-season matches, because there was some big news out of a few of these matches. Let's go to the Leeds-Wigan match. Leeds 22 defeating Wigan 4. The big news, Maika Sivo.
Well, that was a great result for Leeds, wasn't it? It was Ash Handley's testimonial game, so hopefully he will have made a few quid out of that, and he thoroughly deserves to do so. But the great win was overshadowed by the very sad injury to Maika Sivo, and I've always thought, Jake, that pre-season games are a massive risk for clubs because you're fielding players in often quite difficult conditions. We're in the depths of winter, really. Pitches are gluey, greasy, and often you're playing in cold and rain and so on. Now, I don't know whether that means there's more likelihood of injuries, but it always seems, intuitively you assume that there probably is. And poor old Maika Sivo, obviously, our best wishes go to him for a recovery, but he's unlikely to play at all now for the rest of the season. The only good thing for Leeds about that, and it's a very small consolation in a sense, it's no consolation for Maika, but it happened before the Rhinos played their first official game of the season, so they can actually take Maika Sivo off their salary cap officially and replace him with somebody else if they wish to do so. So, that might have implications, for example, for players from Salford, mightn't it? Yeah,
absolutely, mate. And, it's sad that we're not going to be able to see him in action this season.
Yeah, I mean, he's had a great few years for Parramatta, hasn't he? He's a big unit, is Maika, and I was really looking forward to seeing him charging down the wing at Headingley, but, that's... Sadly, now he won't be doing that for a long time, and that's just part of the game, I'm afraid. ACL injuries are the worst injuries you can get, really, arguably. Maybe head injuries are equally unfortunate. But, I feel so sorry for him and for Leeds as well.
Now, do you think, because I think a few weeks ago you and I were talking about Jake Connor, just having him in the side, and we sort of thought that there might be some injuries throughout the season in that back line. It sort of makes his signing look like a masterstroke now, doesn't it?
Oh, well, yes. And the thing is that he actually played at fullback against Wigan because Lachie Miller is still recovering from injury himself. So, and Jake Connor had a very good game, apparently. I mean, I obviously haven't seen the game, but by all accounts, Jake played very well. And I would imagine he'd stay at fullback for as long as Lachie Miller is still recovering from injury. I don't know how long. I'm not particularly knowledgeable about how long it will take Lachie to get back onto the pitch. But you would imagine if they don't sign anybody else in the near future, you'd imagine that Ash Handley will revert to the wing, Ryan Hall on the other wing. And Jake Connor might well play at centre for them. So I think Leeds are covered, aren't they? It's a tragedy, that Mike has been injured, but Leeds will be able to survive without him, I think. And they've got some very good young players as well on the fringes who'd be pressing to fill those vacant slots. So I don't think any Leeds fan need panic. And actually, they, far from panicking, beating Wigan 22-4 is, an achievement in itself, albeit it's a pre-season game. So, you have to put the qualifier on that pre-season games rarely end up being replicated in the season proper.
And we'll keep an eye on the open market there, see if any players become
yes.
available as well. The other a big match-up, mate, York and Hull KR over in Amsterdam.
Yes.
26 defeating, or York 26 defeating Hull KR 12 in front of 2,715 fans.
Yes, it was an under-strength Hull KR side. It wasn't, the Hull KR's best side that they could put out. And, and it was, great for York. We had Clint Goodchild on the podcast last week, and that proved to be a very popular podcast, I'm very glad to say. But it was a great experiment and fantastic to get all those Dutch people coming. And, of course, the key thing, I'm going to Hull KR tomorrow for their media day. And obviously one of the questions is, will any of those Dutch people from Amsterdam take the plunge and come over to watch Hull KR in Super League? Well, obviously you would assume not many would do, but even if just 20 or 30 did, it'd be a great achievement for Hull KR and for York, of course, because it'd be great for Dutch people to come to the cities of Hull and York to watch some rugby league. So marvellous and great to get the crowd that they got. And we had Steve Mascord there, the great Australian journalist, your fellow countryman, used to write for the Sydney Morning Herald. He did a report for us and also did a very nice colour piece, which we have on the inside back of this week's League Express. And he clearly enjoyed himself, and it was very clear that I think everybody who was there did. So wonderful experiment. I hope it continues, and I just really like the idea of taking rugby league to new audiences.
Yeah, he looked like the busiest man in Amsterdam, Steve Mascord, over the weekend, mate. He was everywhere, so good job to Steve. He was a great ambassador for the game over there, so hats off to him.
Absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, mate, so I think I'd like to see an actual Super League fixture mid-season, middle of summer, taken over to Amsterdam. I'm sure that would attract a lot of people from the UK as well.
Yeah, I think it would. Or how about even taking the Magic Weekend to Amsterdam one weekend? I think a lot of people would go there.
I'd go, mate.
Yeah, you would, even from Australia.
Yeah. We'll see if we can get some subsidised flights. Maybe the RFL might chip in, perhaps.
Yeah.
Unlikely. The other pre-season, there's two other pre-season matches here. I've got Salford defeating Saints, 40 points to 12. A big win. I think Salford fans probably enjoyed that win and needed it.
It's interesting, actually, because, with all the... with everything that's been happening at Salford, all the uncertainty and so on, and the talk about having to release players, I think the Salford chief executive, Paul King, was a bit worried that, he might get a bit of verbal abuse from Salford fans at this game, but after winning 40 points to 12, I don't think he will have done, hopefully anyway, because he's a great guy, I think, is Paul King, and certainly doesn't deserve that sort of, uninformed criticism. But yeah, what a great win. Mark Sneed again dominant in that game. It was Morgan Knowles' testimonial for 10 years at St Helens. And Morgan Knowles, by the way, being increasingly linked with a move to the NRL next season, with Christian Wolf at the Dolphins apparently very interested in signing him. And I wouldn't be too surprised if Christian was very persuasive in chasing Morgan, and Morgan, I think, would go well in the NRL. Yeah. But unfortunately for him, the Saints weren't firing on all cylinders against Salford. Having said that, they put on a load of reserves in the second half. So again, let's not read too much. If you're a Saints fan, obviously the scoreline looks disappointing, but it's a pre-season trial game, and no points are at stake. It's not, the scoreline isn't the important thing. It's allowing the coaches to see what the players have got to offer that's important, isn't it?
That's it. and testing new combinations, that sort of thing, seeing where the fitness level's at, getting some players to return from injury, that sort of thing.
Well, these two teams will meet again in the first game of the season in February. Also at St Helens, and that's the game that counts, not this one. And of course, by then we're not sure whether Salford will have a side that's as strong as the one they put out on Saturday, or whether they might be weakened by player departures. It's impossible to be sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll touch on that a little bit later as well, mate. The other pre-season match, Wakefield 32 defeating Castleford 8. A good win for Wakefield.
Yeah, Luke Gow's testimonial game, this one, and apparently both sets of supporters gave him a standing ovation. He came on for the last few minutes of the game, kicked a goal, and again, let's make that cautionary statement that it's a pre-season game. Let's not get too carried away by the result. But having said that, I think Wakefield and Darryl Powell, the coach in particular, will be very happy with how that game turned out. They were pretty dominant, as the scoreline suggests, and Castleford were, pretty disappointing, really. And one or two, they allowed Wakefield to dominate. Castleford's defence clearly needs a bit more attention, I think. So we'll see what they can come back with.
That's it. I mean, a lot can change in the next 2 weeks. With
it
full
will
strength
do
sides
as well,
coming
yes.
in, so we'll wait and see. Now, mate, as we mentioned, a lot of Challenge Cup action over the weekend. We won't be able to touch on everything, but I guess the standout fixture, Gould versus London.
Yes, and that was shown on the BBC online. So I was actually in the office on Saturday and watched that game. And it was well presented, I've got to say, on TV. The game was played at Roslyn Park, which is quite a famous rugby union club in London, in Roehampton. And it was a really fine game. London were winning 10-0 just before half-time, but the Gould Vikings came back into it with a try shortly before half-time. And then, as the game went on, they increasingly dominated the second half. London had quite a scratch team, to be honest, because, of course, they're still waiting to see whether the takeover of that club will go ahead, as we keep being told it will do. But I thought, actually, the London had quite a few players who had previously played with London Scholars, who are no longer in the RFL League One competition. But I didn't think they played too badly. But Gould Vikings, they've put together a squad that's going to be very useful in League One, and they're no mugs. They've got a lot of experience, they've got a lot of enthusiasm, and they've got a coach in Scott Taylor who's got a lot of ambition and commitment. So you put together all those qualities, and you've got a squad that's certainly better than you would expect for a brand new team in the competition. So I think they'll be very competitive right from day one in the League One competition. Their first home game in League One is against Midlands Hurricanes, who are also an improving side based in Birmingham, of course. So I think that's going to be quite interesting, Jake.
No, definitely, mate. And I think is it the next round will be held not this weekend, next weekend?
Yes, that's right. And Gould play Wakefield, but I understand that they are going to take that game to Wakefield because their stadium, the Victoria Pleasure Grounds in Gould, is having some work done on it at the moment. And I don't think they can accommodate a game on that second round weekend. So I think they're going to have to take it to Wakefield. Right. I think the RFL will confirm later today. By the time people are watching this podcast, I think that news will have been confirmed. But that'll be quite interesting for them going to Wakefield. And one of the good things about that game in London was that there were quite a few Gould Vikings supporters there. They've actually already, created a supporter base, and that was really encouraging to see how many of them went down there to watch their team in London. I mean, it's a pretty long journey, isn't it? So, great for them. And I think London Broncos will bounce back from that result because I didn't think it wasn't really necessarily a case of London playing badly. I thought Gould rose to the occasion really well, and London will have a lot of I think London ultimately will have a much stronger side when they return to the Cherry Red Record Stadium in Wimbledon. And you might think, well, they'll struggle a bit, but I think they'll hold their own with most of the championship this year.
And I believe the try that sealed the match was an intercept try, so against the run of play. So it must have been a bit of an arm wrestle there before that.
Intercept tries are always interesting, aren't they? But yes, Thomas Minns was the guy, and again, another very experienced player who's played at the highest level. Yeah. So Gould, although they're a new club, they've been very astute in the way that they've recruited players, and I'm sure that's down to Scott Taylor with his knowledge of opponents over the years, and I think he's got a very good idea of who to recruit, and they've done it very successfully.
I must say their social media team seems to be doing a good job as well, because I don't think I follow any of their accounts on my social media, but they've managed to work their way into my feed, which means they're doing something right.
They're doing a great job, aren't they? They're very smart. They're a lot smarter than a lot of other rugby league clubs on social media. They're putting stuff out, and certainly, after their win in London on Saturday, I had various emails from Gould Vikings, one with, the comments from Scott Taylor after the game, and another with comments, I think it was from Thomas Minns. They're feeding the media about their exploits, which is a marvellous thing to do. And, congratulations on them. I really wish them well for the year, and I hope that they, really make a significant impact on rugby league in this country. I don't think they'll win at Wakefield, of course, in the next round of the Challenge Cup, but maybe they don't think they will either. But they'll give Wakefield a game. Put it that way.
That's it. And I guess you gain a lot out of coming up against a strong side like Wakefield. So it'd be great to see that matchup. Any other fixtures you'd like to touch on before we get into some of the news this week, mate? Or?
Well, if we just look at it was interesting, wasn't it, that a lot of the games were fairly one-sided, actually. But if we look at the ones that stand out, I think Bradford Bulls beating Doncaster by 30 points to 4. I think Bradford are going to be the strongest championship side this year. North Wales Crusaders going down to Cornwall, winning 52-0. In very, very difficult conditions, and that's the point, really. When you're launching the season in January, a lot of these games are played on pitches that really, churned up and were very muddy, and I just think it's quite difficult to be honest, Jake, and I wish actually that we didn't start the season so early. Midlands Hurricanes beating Siddle 46-0. Siddle, one of the very strongest community clubs, but Midlands Hurricanes, I think they'll go well in League One this year. Yeah. I really do, and I think it's going to be an interesting year for them. Widnes winning at Rochdale 34-16. Again, I think Widnes are going to be very strong. Workington very easily winning down in Portsmouth against the Royal Navy, probably the longest journey that any rugby league side might make this year, I would think, apart from those going to Cornwall.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Whitehaven beating Swinton 24-12. Whitehaven's an interesting one, because I've written a piece in this week's League Express about the Cumbrian clubs, and the Whitehaven had all those very well publicised financial problems last year. The club was really in trouble, but they managed to get some more people involved who were able to plug the gap a little. But they had a complete change in strategy this year. Instead of signing, overseas stars, which they've done a lot of in the past few years, they've focused on signing young players from the local, junior clubs. And it's paying dividends. They beat Workington a week ago for the Ike Southwood Trophy, the pre-season game between the two sides, and they've beaten Swinton 24-12 in the Challenge Cup, and they now go forward to the next round of the Challenge Cup. Just see who they play in that. They play Warrington at home in the next round. Well, obviously you wouldn't expect them to win that game, but I think there's a mini revival of rugby league hopefully in West Cumbria with Workington doing so well as well. I think Workington, trying to see who they play in the next round. Why am I not seeing their name anywhere? Workington play Leeds, so that's another really interesting game in West Cumbria, isn't it? And there's a lot to get excited about, I think, for West Cumbria this year. Both teams are in League One, so they will have derby matches against each other in that competition. And I'd love to see those two clubs thrive in West Cumbria. I'm one of those people, some people say, they ought to merge and have a single Cumbrian side that would play in Super League. I think that's rubbish, personally, because, if you merge two sides, we saw it in Australia, you very often antagonise the supporters of both clubs, don't you, by destroying their identity. And I just think that's the last thing you should be doing. So, the key thing is we want both clubs to thrive and prosper, in their own identity as they are, not as we might want them to be. If you merge two weak clubs, you end up with one weak club, and if you end up with one weak club, there's always a danger that you might end up with no clubs whatsoever. So it's a foolish idea in my opinion. The idea of merging the two Cumbrian clubs, West Cumbrian clubs. And
I like that approach that you touched on. They're looking to find that junior talent as well. Because
of course,
if I was running one of these clubs, I'd have the assistant coaches of the team going to one under-18s or under-17s match every weekend, just trying to identify the diamond in the rough or a player that hasn't been signed.
And the great thing is, Jake, if you sign players from some of the local clubs, local junior clubs, you'll get the parents of the players coming, and probably a lot of the teammates as well coming to watch them play. So you boost your attendances, not by a massive amount, but maybe by a significant enough amount, to really count. It'll be interesting to see the attendances for both those games when they're played in the third round against Super League opposition. I hope they both get well into four figures.
Absolutely, mate. No, we can't wait for that one. Let's get into some of the news points, Martyn. So, still a lot of uncertainty around Salford at the moment. There's that Australian takeover bid that they're trying to get across the line before the season starts.
Yes.
Any word or updates? It's pretty quiet coming out of Salford at the moment.
Well, I think the fact that it's quiet is probably a good thing. If the takeover talks collapse, then we'll get to know about it very quickly. And no news is good news, actually, Jake, in this regard. So I do know that the people involved in the takeover bid have been talking to Salford City Council, for example, and there's a lot of talk about the stadium and so on, and how their takeover might affect the ownership of the stadium and so on. So there are a lot of issues to talk through. So it's not really that surprising that it's taking quite a long time. To buy a rugby league club is a complex operation, particularly when that club needs an injection of finance to ensure that it can be competitive. So, we don't know, but I do get I'm picking up vibes, as you may say, that suggest a deal is on the cards, but I'd hate to give the impression that that's definitely going to happen, because until it's announced and signed, sealed and delivered, we can't be absolutely sure. But what's quite interesting is that Salford, one sign that the deal is still on the table is that Salford haven't let any of their players go to any other club yet. Clearly, if that deal collapsed, then Salford would have to let players go. There's no doubt about it. And there are other clubs who would be keen to sign their players. We know that, obviously. Their players have been linked with several other clubs. So, they would be ready to go if that deal collapsed. But the thing is that Salford have been told that they've got to run a salary cap of 1.25 million this year, which is a ridiculously low amount, really. But if they have to do that, they'll, as I understand it, they'll only be able to register players up to a value of 1.25 million in the first instance, for as long as that, for as long as the RFL maintains that requirement. So, for example, their next game will be on the weekend of February the 8th and 9th, when they travel to Midlands Hurricanes to play in the third round of the Challenge Cup. That'll be in Birmingham. Well, with no disrespect to Midlands Hurricanes, who are an improving club in League One, but Salford would probably be able to run a team against them with a 1.25 million salary cap and feel pretty comfortable. You know, they could leave out Mark Sneed. I assume Mark Sneed is at the top of their salary cap. They could leave out one or two other major players who would be on, you know, the higher end of their salary scale, and still have, you know, quite enough to win that Challenge Cup game. The crunch game comes the following weekend when they play at St Helens on the opening weekend of Super League. That's when they'll need to be at their strongest. So, you know, as far as I can see, that's when they need the deal to be done, if it can be done, so that they can, you know, so that the RFL can lift the cap requirement, and they can then, you know, put out a full-strength side against St Helens. And after that win at the weekend, you know, in the pre-season game, I think that'd be a game really worth watching.
Do you think Paul Rowley's losing any sleep over this?
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, Paul Rowley doesn't strike me as the sort of guy who panics very easily.
Yeah,
he's a very stable guy, is Paul, isn't he? He just strikes me as someone with a very firm head on his shoulders. So, you know, I think he will take it in his stride, and he will do what needs to be done. And you know, but I hope on, you know, that for him, I suppose, that by the time the Saints game comes around, he'll be able to field his strongest side.
Yeah, there have been reports that the RFL is looking to give dispensation to clubs who are willing to make a bid.
Oh, they are. Yes, they will do.
Players.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there are clubs. You know, the clubs now do have a dispensation, so there's no shortage of clubs who will be able to buy their players. But in my view, that's not the best solution. The best solution is for the deal to, you know, to go ahead and for Salford to have new owners.
Because there was also reports that Lee were circling Mark Sneed.
I think they've pulled out of that.
Have they?
Yeah,
okay.
I believe so. Yeah.
Which is it's a shame in a way, because if he was to go to a club, you think the amount of players Lee Leopards have lost, they could really do with someone like him, couldn't they?
Would he fit though well with Lachlan Lamont in the halfbacks? I mean, we had a discussion, didn't we, not long ago on this podcast about whether Mark Sneed and Aidan Caesar would be a good fit at Hull FC. And I think I said then that you only need one dominant halfback.
Yeah.
If you're going to have two, obviously every club has two halfbacks, but one is dominant and one is, you know, has a subsidiary role. Aidan Caesar will always be dominant at Hull, and Mark Sneed will always be dominant at Salford. Put two dominant players together, and I'm just not sure. I'm not sure it'd work, to be perfectly honest. And the same thing might be true of, you know, Lachlan Lamb rules the roost at Lee, and I'm not sure that bringing Mark Sneed in there would work well with him playing alongside Lachlan Lamb. I'm not saying that they would, you know, deliberately fall out or anything like that. They'd obviously, you know, play together. But I just think on the field, you know, you only need one of them to be the dominant player, and I think they're both naturally dominant players. So I'm just not sure it would work well.
That's it, and I think, you know, you're leaving it this late with the season just around the corner. It'd be a case of, if Mark Sneed was to leave to another club, you'd have to think for the first few weeks he'd have to take a back seat just to learn the structures, the plays, the game plan. Yeah. So, yes, a lot to keep an eye out for over the next 2 weeks. Let's hope they can get that deal done.
The thing about Mark Sneed as well is, I mean, you know, he's got a good contract at Salford, and I think they probably have a deal with him in place to put him onto their coaching staff when he retires. And Sneed, I mean, Mark Sneed could make a great living out of being a kicking coach, couldn't he?
Absolutely.
Let's face it, So, I don't think he's got too much to worry about in the long term.
Goal kicking and kicks and play.
Yes, absolutely. He's a very brainy guy, and I think he's got a lot to offer almost anybody in a coaching context. Another year or two down the line.
Absolutely, mate. Now, some other news. I saw we had an article in League Express this week. Here it is right here, actually. Chris Radlinski talking about he wants Super League clubs or his club to have closer links with NRL teams. And it's sort of come off the back of all the work and the marketing that's been done around Vegas and all the help that Wigan are getting from the NRL team. Do you think his comments, is sort of relaying that importance of having a good relationship with the NRL?
I think it's important. I mean, there's been all this talk about the NRL investing in Super League. That's gone a bit quiet recently. But I think Chris Radlinski, who I've got a great deal of respect for, I think Chris has been impressed by the professionalism that the NRL has shown, because they've got weekly Zoom meetings where all the clubs that are involved in the trip to Vegas in both the NRL and Super League are discussing what arrangements are being made and so on and so forth. Obviously, I'm not in that discussion, so I don't know the detail of them. But Chris has clearly been impressed by that, and I think the greater the coordination between us and the NRL, the better. The obvious point to make is that the trip to Vegas would be a great one for the World Club Challenge, wouldn't it? I'm quite sure that Chris Radlinski would have loved to have been playing Penrith in Vegas this year. I mean, obviously they're playing Warrington, playing a Super League game. He's pretty happy with that, but it would have been great to see them playing Penrith, and it's a shame they aren't really.
And it makes me wonder. So obviously, it's a big investment from a Wigan standpoint to go over to Vegas, but the amount of help he's getting from the NRL, do you think he's impressed by that and comparing it to the amount of help they're getting from IMG and thinking, if we're getting this for free from the NRL,
very probably,
why are we paying all this money to IMG?
Well, if Chris isn't very happy with IMG, he's probably not the only one, really, is he? Let's face it. And, but who knows? I mean, the trouble is that none of us know what IMG are doing in the background. IMG are, being deliberately secretive, I suppose you might say, about what advice they're giving the RFL and RL Commercial. But who knows? Who knows what's going on?
Yeah, all right, we'll wait and see. I'm sure Vegas is going to be a huge success. So
let's hope so. It'd be interesting how many tickets they've sold now, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I've not seen the latest figures.
Well, I guess the UK figure, we know that there's been about 8,000 tickets sold from UK fans, which is great. But some other Vegas news, making headlines. Peter V'landys, he's invited President Trump to the Vegas fixtures, mate, just underneath this article here. Do you think he'll make an appearance?
Well, Trump loves Las Vegas. Trump
he does.
And Trump loves Las Vegas for various reasons. He loves, he loves the bright lights, seemingly.
Yeah.
But also, as the article says, it's taken from the Sydney Morning Herald, the comments that V'landys made here. But Trump actually won the state of Nevada in his presidential campaign, and that was the first Republican win for 20 years in Nevada. And I think one of the reasons for his win was that he said in the campaign that he was going to remove the tax on tips for people who work in the hospitality and entertainment sector. Well, that would go down really well, wouldn't it, in Las Vegas, because there's an awful lot of that there. So I suspect that is why he probably won that state in the presidential election. And the funny thing is that Trump was actually in Las Vegas on Saturday, apparently, having a rally to thank his, all the people who voted for him in that state. So it does like going there. I'd be amazed if he turned out on the 1st of March, but stranger things have happened, haven't they? Because they invited Biden there last year, but obviously President Biden didn't turn up. But he's not quite as strongly linked with Vegas and with major sporting events as Trump is. Trump is very well known for being a keen fan of UFC wrestling. He's very friendly with a lot of, and boxing, of course. He is very friendly with a lot of people in that sport. So he's more closely linked with sport. So you never know. Who knows?
And that's it. There's close ties as well with the NRL and some of our Australian mixed martial arts fighters that fight in the UFC. So maybe we could just get that chain of command. Pass on a few little envelopes or letters to Donald Trump, and hopefully we can get it in his hands.
Who knows? Yeah.
It'd be
certainly
funny
if
to
they
see
are
him.
serious about getting him. If Trump thinks that he will benefit from the publicity, then he might go. Who knows?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the removing the taxes on tips. Geez, it'd be a good job being a blackjack dealer in Vegas.
Yeah,
I'm sure you get some nice tips if you.
If you've got some ambition to go over there, I think you'd be great in that role.
Mate, I don't know. I'd be too nervous, I think, that I'd stuff up my maths.
Yeah.
Speaking of the NRL, mate, there's a lot of talk at the moment around the next broadcasting deal. V'landys has come out and said that he set a deadline for mid-year in terms of getting that next deal across the line. Looks like there's going to be a few different broadcasters bidding for it. Some new ones, DAZN, who've just taken over Foxtel in Australia, Network 10 and Amazon are all set to bid alongside Channel 9, I imagine, for the broadcasting rights.
Gosh, isn't that great? I mean, wouldn't we love that over here? We've got... this is the second year of our 3-year deal. And whereas in Australia, all the talk is so positive about, the next TV deal, we're in danger potentially of running with an 11-team competition and potentially breaking the contract with Sky here, which obviously I hope doesn't happen. But we need more people bidding for rugby league in this country, whether it's DAZN, whether it's Amazon, whoever it might be. We need to get more people, more broadcasting organisations wanting to screen our game.
And I think there's still 2 years left to run on the deal. Do you think setting that mid-year deadline, do you think that's too early? Do you think they'd gain more value leaving it a little bit later, or do you think that's the perfect time?
I think you need to be able to plan ahead. So, whatever deal you're going to come up with, you need to have a good idea of what sort of financial impact it's going to have in future years. And, the sooner the better, in my view. And, I mean, and particularly when the ratings in Australia have been going so well, strike while the iron's hot, Jake, is normally the best thing to do in any sort of business, isn't it?
Yeah.
While if you think your product is in high demand, then make the best of it.
No, definitely. And the other thing do you want to add to
I was just going to say, I was watching quite an interesting discussion, a rugby union discussion on one of the rugby union podcasts, where I think they were talking to the chief executive of the RFU about, some of the current problems that rugby union has. And amazingly enough, they were talking about rugby union in the Southern Hemisphere and, the situation that it finds itself in. And this guy, I think his name is Bill Sweeney, was saying, rugby union in New Zealand is facing a major challenge from the New Zealand Warriors. And he was saying, young people in New Zealand seem to be following the Warriors now more than the All Blacks. And I thought that was such an interesting thing to see on a rugby union podcast, wasn't it?
Especially someone from their code having those comments. You'd expect like if V'landys was to say something like that.
Oh, yeah.
To have someone in that position in the RFU.
But, you do wonder when are they going to put a second team in New Zealand on... probably on the South Island, because, again, strike while the iron's hot. And but obviously they need to be sure that they're getting the right backing for that sort of development. But I think it will come.
I'm thinking about just back to the broadcasting deal in terms of all the money it's going to bring to the game. Obviously, we're going to see bigger salary caps. Do you think we're going to see the first contract where it exceeds 2 million Australian dollars a year?
Eventually, yeah. Eventually.
Depends how long it goes for, I guess, too.
That will happen.
You have to imagine players like Nathan Cleary would probably be able to command that much money.
You would have thought so, yes.
But yeah, we'll wait and see.
Yeah.
We sort of touched on it, mate, but Morgan Knowles, links with him to Christian Wolf at the Dolphins. I'd imagine if that does come into fruition, that'd be for next season onwards, you'd imagine.
Yes, that's right.
Do you know how old Morgan Knowles would be
28.
roughly?
He's 28 now.
Okay, so he's still got, 5-6 years.
Oh, yes, potentially,
easily,
yeah.
All going well. Now, I also thought, mate, why don't we take a look at this week's readers' poll in League Express just to see what it is. I like sort of talking about this on the podcast. What do we got here?
Which other major cities should Rugby League target? Barcelona, Belfast, Bristol, Cardiff, Dublin, Edinburgh or Paris. Of all those 7 places, where would you rather see Rugby League being played?
Well...
And I'll tell you, you tell me which one you like, and I'll tell you which is winning at the moment.
All right, well, just straight off the bat, I've already, as a tourist, I want to go to Barcelona because I haven't been to Barcelona yet. The weather's beautiful, from what I've heard. So I'd like to go there. I love Edinburgh as a city, though. It's one of my favourite cities I've visited. Paris, obviously, as well. Great city. I haven't been to Dublin or Cardiff yet. Neither have I been to Bristol or Belfast. But
no.
I think Barcelona's probably my top pick.
That's the place that's winning the vote at the moment. Yeah. So if any of our readers are really keen to see games played in any other of those cities, then get voting because, they're fallen behind a bit in terms of votes at the moment, and it'll attract quite a strong vote, I'm fairly sure. So yeah, that's really interesting, and I think we just need to take rugby league to more places, don't we?
And you mentioned that in one of your columns this week, not your regular column.
Yes,
you also did
straight talking.
Straight talking, yeah.
Yeah.
That was one of your suggestions you had many years ago. In the 2000s?
Taking games on the road, yeah. I actually claim the credit for that idea. Yeah. Going back to 1998, when I put forward the idea because we had to replace the World Club Challenge that had been held in 1997, and the fixture list had a 3-week gap in it, right. And I suggested taking games on the road, and it worked quite well. But like many things in rugby league, we try things, they appear to work reasonably well, but we then drop them.
Get away from it, yeah.
Ridiculous, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes back, for example, just talking about those cities where the game's played. We actually had a Magic Weekend in Cardiff for several years. In fact, the first one in 2007. We took the Challenge Cup final to Cardiff in 2003 and 2005. But then, nothing.
Haven't been back since? Or?
No, we just completely... We don't stick with anything. That's the difference between us and, for example, the NRL. The NRL set up a club in Melbourne and then made sure it worked. We just, don't do that for very often because we've not got the resources. But nonetheless, ridiculous, really.
And that's the thing. Like we've touched on it before as well. But the NRL does it. The Bulldogs, it's the Dolphins. They take some of their matches. I think it's the Bulldogs' home game. They take it up to Bundaberg, and they have played the Dolphins the last couple of years. Yes. We see the Souths. They've taken a few games up to the Sunshine Coast.
That's right.
They do it at Queensland Cup and New South Wales Cup level as well.
A lot of country towns stage, one-off NRL games, and they always get great crowds, don't they? It's always a massive event in those places. And again, that's one of rugby league's strengths in Australia. It's something that the AFL can't do. The AFL can't. They play all their games in either Melbourne or Geelong, playing Geelong, of course, and the other games, in the various state capital cities. But the NRL has got the potential to take their game to the people in a way that the AFL doesn't. Unfortunately, they recognise that and they do it, and it's great to see. And let's hope that continues.
Yeah. because it's also great for the country towns as well because it improves the field as well. They've got to get up to an NRL level, and I've played a few matches on that Salter Oval in Bundaberg where the Dolphins and Bulldogs have played their games, and that's usually a cricket oval. And I remember being tackled in the middle of the field a few times on the cricket pitch, and it's not the softest landing, let me tell you, mate.
It's not, no.
With a bit of skin off you, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, Bundaberg residents, I think they pack that little stadium out. They get like 8,000 people there.
Yeah.
It's great for the community as well.
It is,
so.
yeah.
All right, mate. Any other news you want to touch on?
Well, Liam Farrell, new contract for Liam Farrell,
right.
the Wigan captain, another 2 years. I mean, Liam, does seem to have been playing for a long time. He's a very distinctive guy, of course. He's got you couldn't fail to recognise him. And again, it's an interesting one, isn't it, with Liam? He's the captain of Wigan, the captain of the biggest club in the game. He ought to have a massive public presence, and he speaks very well when he's put in front of a camera and microphone and so on. But again, our leading players ought to be better known than they are. I suspect that when Wigan announced Liam's new contract, very few national newspapers will have picked up on it in the way that they would do if it were a major rugby union or football club. So, great for him, and congratulations to Liam and to Wigan for agreeing that deal. But, I just think we ought to, it illustrates once again that our players lack the public profile that they ought to have.
And I guess as we see one Wigan legend signing on, we also see another departing in Willie Iso. He's announced his retirement, mate.
Well, yes, and he's actually said he's got another opportunity to go elsewhere, but not saying where that is. So he will no doubt resurface probably in the southern hemisphere.
Okay,
I assume. I'm
so
not sure.
completely retiring, but
well, no, he'll be. What I suspect is he'll be going into some form of coaching or whatever.
Okay.
Who knows? But I'm not quite sure. So, but good luck to Willie, and it's been great to watch him for all these years. He first came to Castleford, then went to Widnes, and then went to Wigan. And he's had a really great career, and it obviously ended with injury last year, which was disappointing, but we send our best wishes to Willie and hope everything works out well for him.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always nice when you read under like the posts on social media, all the fans sending their well wishes, and it looked like he was a much respected player.
Absolutely,
and a fan favourite there. So
yeah, but this article in Straight Talking, the things that we might reimagine. I actually wrote this article because 2 weeks ago there was a reader of League Express who wrote a piece saying, where is the reimagining that IMG is supposed to be doing? And that sort of stimulated my thought, well, what can they reimagine? And I've listed 10 things there, which, all of which could be reframed to improve the overall image of rugby league. And I'll be putting this article from the paper on the website today, so a wider audience will get the chance to see it. But I'd be very interested to see what sort of feedback that gets.
No, absolutely, mate, because 10 recommendations there.
Did you read through them?
Yeah, I did. And,
any of them that you didn't like, or?
Let me just have a think. I think you and I both agree on making the most of the nines in different ways we can revolutionise the game to attract more viewers. I think you and I agree on the different strips teams are wearing. Sometimes it's hard to tell what team's playing.
There's no distinctive identity, is there? That our teams have. When you see, for example, I mean, we always like to if you want to see where sport is marketed most effectively, then you look to the United States. Clearly they're streets ahead of us in terms of marketing their sports. But if you look at the NFL, their uniform is so distinctive. If you look at college football, their uniform is also very distinctive, but different from the NFL. The players wear shorter shorts, don't they? That just marks them out so that if you switch on the TV, you know what it is you're watching. And with our game, you switch on the TV, you see a pitch that has no markings whatsoever, not telling you what sport you're watching, and strips that have no distinct common themes or branding, it seems. So, it just, when we're talking about branding, we're not really even getting to first base, are we, in rugby league? And that's the thing that's frustrating.
And that's it. Like, it's all well and good, though, for us to sort of make these comments, but the other thing is it's also a business, isn't it? And with less money coming into the game, it's a great way for clubs to make some money through merchandise, I guess.
Oh, yeah. I'm not criticising the clubs. What I'm saying is it needs a coordinated approach so that, the competition itself has a greater branding that appeals more to a wider audience.
No, absolutely. I've got a few wild ideas around the Nines concept that we might delve into in later episodes.
Absolutely,
mate.
yeah.
But yeah, we just need some more creative thinkers, don't we?
We do, yes, we do.
But yeah, all right, mate. Let's.
And the other, just one other item of news that we might, refer to. The chairman of RL Commercial, Frank Slevin, is going to step down in July after completing the terms of his 3-year contract. I think there are family problems that Frank has that will cause him to relinquish that post, and good luck to him in the future. But if you fancy the job, Jake, fancy becoming the chairman of RL Commercial, there's a vacancy there waiting for you, mate.
Might be a bit of a conflict of interest, though.
It might be. Well, somebody said to me, "Do you want to do it?" And I said, "Well, I'd love it, but I couldn't imagine it." And of course, they wouldn't appoint me. But you never know, do you?
Who knows, mate? Who knows? I say, if I take the job, mate, will I get criticised by you every week?
Of course.
All right, then. Well, that's a no for me, then. All right. We will remind our viewers and listeners, mate, if they do want to grab this week's edition of the League Express paper.
It's still available.
That's right. And we always chuck a QR code up on the screen for our YouTube listeners to scan if they want to get their quick copy.
Absolutely.
And then for anyone listening, totalrl.com/shop, and that'll point you in the right direction.
Yes.
All right, Martyn, we'll wrap it up here, mate.
Great.
Do it again next week, hey?
Marvellous. Great.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jake.
No worries.
Cheers,
Thanks, mate.